Today we're doing a ceiling patch. They had water damage from the above bathroom. Plumber had to come in here, open up the ceiling to fix the P-trap. So we're going to go ahead and just cut out this damaged area and replace it with new sheetrock and get it all taped with the fiberglass mesh tape. Simple, easy process here. What I always like to do in cutouts, I like to mask off the area since there's going to be some cutout involved on the ceiling, a little bit of dust involved. I just went ahead and put plastic around just to contain my cutout, dust, stuff like that. Once you get it all masked off and you're ready to start doing some demo, just measure out your area. Everybody just starts pulling away sheetrock. Sometimes you want to just take the extra time to just level out the area with a pencil. I'm using a drywall T-square. Of course, if you don't have a T-square, you can use a piece of wood like a 2x4, ruler, anything that has a straight edge. Just basically mark your points. Here I'm trying to keep it simple because it's going to use a quarter of a sheet of drywall. A sheet of drywall is 4x8. So I'm going to cut out a 2 foot by 4 foot. That way I just use a quarter section of sheetrock. And this is going to go a little further, so it's going to go like 4 feet and 6 inches. So I'm going to have to put in a little piece, but no big deal. But just kind of see your layout. Don't just start cutting out whole ceiling sections. You kind of want to mark it out. That way you're not using more sheetrock than you have on hand. You know, if it's going to be one sheet of drywall 4x8, you don't want to cut out 9 foot by 10 foot. So you want to try to just use what you have. With these patch cutouts, for me, it's always easier to do cutout like a 1x1, 2x2, 2x4 like that, or 4x4. So I try to keep it the same, so it's easy. Many tools here to use. I got a multi-tool. These multi-tools are fine and dandy, but they kind of go off course unless you really push deep into the sheetrock, which I don't like to do because I really don't know what's underneath the sheetrock. It could be wires and pipes. So sometimes it's maybe easier just to score with the razor blade your pencil line or your chalk line, and then follow it through with this multi-tool so it doesn't jump out of your groove that you made. Or you could just use a simple keyhole saw, a hand saw, or a razor blade, which is probably easier than these multi-tools. Like I said, these multi-tools, they jump all over, but I just wanted to use this tool since I had it. But you can see it just kind of zigzags and goes off center of the pencil lines. So that's why I don't like to use these multi-tools that much, at least on ceilings. Walls, they're easier because you can control, but overhead, with the dust falling on your face, they kind of jump everywhere. So that's why I don't like to use these multi-tools as much as I should. But get it cut out. There's no right or wrong way cut out. You just don't want to go too deep in the sheetrock. The sheetrock's going to be at least 1/2 inch thick, so I don't like to go anything further than 1/2 inch when I cut it out, just in case there's pipes in there, wires, stuff like that. You just really need to score the sheetrock with a razor blade and snap it back. But that's just an easy way of just cutting out the sheetrock. You want to get it all demoed out. If it is overhead like this, it is going to make dust that falls in your face. So I always wear a mask whenever I remember cut overhead. But razor blade, honestly, razor blades are a lot easier, less dusty, and it's easier to get it scored with the razor blade if you know how to use a razor blade, rock blade. But get it all cut out. Once you get it all cut out, your next step is to pull your screws and nails, double check all the framing, make sure everything looks good. If you have any issues in the ceiling, then you're going to have to treat and address those issues like bad wood, any water damage, stuff like that. You would treat all that before you cover it back up. You really don't know what's under there until you open up the ceiling, see what's all involved. Double check your pipes, make sure the plumber did their job, there's no leaking pipes still, stuff like that while you have the ceiling there. Once you get it all cleaned up, all the screws and nails pulled out, then you can all go ahead and add wood backing. Make sure you have something to screw to on each side. Don't just cut it and don't add backing, because if you put new sheetrock and you don't have something to screw the sheetrock corners to and the edges to, it's going to crack out. So you always need something on the left and right side of any patch. If it's over, you know, 1624, you want to put a stud in between every one. Wood backing, 2x2s, 2x4s, 4x4s, wood sheeting, whatever it takes. You got to add backing. That way you can secure your sheetrock. The old sheetrock also put screws on the outside edges, basically tightening up the old sheetrock, because when you're cutting out an area like this, you're loosening up the existing sheetrock. So always put screws on your studs on your existing sheetrock. That also helps you mark where the studs are, the directions. So I always use the screws in it as my stud finder, so when I put the new sheetrock there, I know which direction the stud's going, how big, how wide, and where it is. So, or you can just use a pencil and mark it, but it's easier just to put screws in it, and that marks your stud with the screws by tightening up your old sheetrock. These cutouts are never going to be perfect. 2x4, sometimes you have to cut them back, rasp them back, square up the edge. Nothing's perfect. The only way to get a perfect cutout is just rip out the whole ceiling area. So you're just trying to cut out a patch in the middle of the ceiling. Keep it as square as possible. If need be, you got to whittle down with the razor blade, cut it down until it's a nice straight edge if possible. If you go ahead and you put the new sheetrock up there and it doesn't fit correctly, just cut it back with your sheetrock. Sometimes it's easier to cut back the old sheetrock than it is the new piece you're trying to put in. But basically you're just making a puzzle piece. Cut it out, cut out a piece to fit in place. That's why it's easier to do nice square areas like this. 2x4, 2x2. Keep it simple. And if you cut out like a small area like this and you still need to cut out more, just take it out another 6 inches, another foot. But you don't want to just start taking out the whole ceiling. You just want to take out the damaged area first, nice and square, and then if it still looks bad, take it out further, if that makes sense. Get all cut out. On this side, I caught the stud, so I'm going to cut it center of the stud, so that way I can have something to screw the new sheetrock to. In this ceiling, I found a piece of wood. Someone left a 1x2 up there. So I was just going to leave it there. But then I decided I'm going to use it because I don't want to go to my truck to use it. If the wood's still in good shape, then you could reuse the wood. I guess they left it up here in the build, or whenever someone was in the attic, they left a 1x2 in here. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm using 1.25" drywall coarse screws because the sheetrock in most interiors are 1/2 inch sheetrock. So all you need is 1.25", maybe 1.5" screws. Anything over 1.5", like 1 5/8", 2-inch screws, we usually use that for 5/8 sheetrock. So on here I'm tightening up the old stud. Basically I'm going to take it out a couple feet. That way I know the sheetrock here, the existing sheetrock's tightened up, nice and secure. That's what you want to do. You don't want loose sheetrock. If you go to put the new piece in, fiberglass it and mud it, and if you didn't tighten up the old sheetrock, then you're asking for a crack. You don't want your patch to crack out. So always add screws in your studs, on your existing studs, trusses, just like I'm doing here. It also helps mark it. You can see I'm going too wide. That's basically showing me the width of the stud that I'm screwing into. Since these are wide trusses, I got a nice wide area to screw to. So I like to mark the width with the screws, and maybe I'll do 1 or 2 out, and that shows me the direction of the screw. Or you could just pencil it, but the screws are sometimes easier to do since you have to put screws in it. Wood here, this is wood backing. Like I said, that piece of wood I found in there, I'm just going to use it. No need for it to just sit in the attic. Someone left it in here, so we're going to use these materials. If they're good piece of wood like this, that's all you need for backing. I'm going to add the wood backing to the right side here. What I'm trying to work in is get that wood stud on the edge. Most people think you just put the sheetrock in, screw it to the existing studs, and then you didn't need to put wood on the side. No, that's not true. You got to add wood backing. Even this is just a little 3-inch gap here. I'm still adding a piece of backing to it, so I know that I can secure my edge of my sheetrock patch to the stud. I have to have it screwed to it. If you just leave the end piece like this, I'm sure it'd work, but putting that piece of wood backing in there guarantees that it's nice and secure patch, something to screw to. But basically the studs in the center are okay, but it matters on the right and left side that you have something to screw the patch to. The other side was already cut center, so I can screw into the existing stud. Now I can screw into my backing and then use the original trusses that are there. I'm marking everything, taking my measurements. I like to measure both sides. I know this is a 4x8, so I know this is cut longer than 4 foot. So I'm going to go 4 foot because the piece of the sheetrock I'm going to cut off the truck. Trailer is going to be off a whole sheet, so I'm just doing a 4 foot by 2 foot section. If it's tight, you could put it up there and maybe put a screw or two in just to hold it in place and then cut it back with your razor. Or you could just take it down and mark it and then just cut it back with the razor blade if your patch is sitting tight. Get it to fit nice and flush. You don't want it hanging over your existing sheetrock. You need the patch nice and flush. Also, make sure you use the correct sheetrock because there is 1/2 inch sheetrock, 5/8 sheetrock. So if you're putting in new sheetrock, make sure you use the original type. 5/8 is usually meant for garages, condos, apartments. It's a fire-rated, thicker, heavy-duty sheetrock. Most interior is done with 1/2 inch sheetrock, 1/2 inch drywall. So just make sure you use the correct stuff. You don't go buy a 5/8 and you put the patch in on a 1/2 inch ceiling like this, and you'd have a big hump on your ceiling where you put the patch. So a lot of people make that mistake. I've gone to jobs where people hung sheetrock themselves. They said, oh, I just need you to come and mud it, texture it. We got it all hung, and I go there and they use the wrong sheetrock. So now I have to take the sheetrock out, get new sheetrock, put it in, so we don't have that big difference, big gap. If you use the wrong sheetrock, you don't want a big hump on the wall or a big gap in the wall. It's even worse if you have a 5/8 wall that existing and then you put 1/2 inch. Now you got a really deep patch that's going to require 4 or 5 coats just to make it flush again. So you want to use the correct sheetrocks, correct size. If you're not sure, just measure the sheetrock with the tape measure, 1/2 inch or 5/8. The only two out there usually. That's standard in most homes. But yeah, once you get it all secured, plenty of screws. I like to add screws every 4 inches. Some people say that's overkill, but it's better safe than sorry to have plenty of screws in it to tighten it up. You want it nice and tight, all the existing studs tight. Anything you need to do, cut back, make everything nice and flush and secure. Once you get everything flush and secure, everything looks good, go through with your 6-inch knife. Scrape it. You got to scrape all your goobers, any high spots, any stuff like that. Any screw heads that you didn't countersink into the sheetrock. You'll know once you go over it with a 6-inch knife if you need to reset your screws deeper. Once everything's scraped off, I'm going to use a spray glue. This spray glue is optional. The reason I'm spraying this is because it's overhead and it just tacks the fiberglass mesh tape into place. I like to use fiberglass mesh tape on all my repair works. There's so many different types of fiberglass mesh tape out there. Some are better than others, but the standard go-to fiberglass mesh tape is sold at most home improvement stores. Just go ahead and use that. I know everybody wants to use fiber fuse, paper tape, this and that. Fiber fuse, paper tape, stuff like that, if it's not fiberglass, you're going to have plenty of mud underneath it before you trowel out the paint so the tape sticks correctly. Fiber fuse, paper tape, all that mud has to dry before you coat over it. And most of those you want to use like a joint compound that dries and shrinks back overnight if you're using paper tape or fiber fuses. If you try to use hot mud, sure, you can use hot mud so the tape sets up quickly, but I recommend using joint compounds if you do use paper tapes or fiber fuses and let them dry overnight before you coat it. With these jobs, I have to finish it in one trip. I can't keep coming back, driving across town over and over to go back to a job to finish it. So once I start, I have to finish the job, get it all mudded, coated, and textured. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, of course, don't do this technique. You can just use a joint compound that has to dry overnight. Then you sand it, second coat, sand it, third coat, sand it, texture. So that's the difference with hot muds that I'm going to be using on this patch later versus joint compounds. Joint compounds are easier for beginners. The muds I'm going to use on this is a quick set hot mud, like a 5-minute mud that sets up quicker, and that'll be later on in the video or the next section of the video. So this will probably be a 2-video part, getting it all sheetrocked, taped, ready for mud. Then I might make a second video doing the mudding and texturing process. But to get everything scraped up, everything looks good, ready to go, then you're ready to fiberglass it. Get it all fiberglass, get it all ready for mud, and then you can turn around and mud it. You just want to make sure everything's taped good. Don't miss any cracks, any seams with tape, because you don't want to do your mudding and then have to put down your mud, go grab your tape and finish taping something you missed. I'm using this spray glue. Like I said, it's optional. This is just tacking the tape in place. You don't have to use this. Your fiberglass will stick in place. If you don't have glue, you can also just strike in like a pre-fill the gaps with mud and then put the tape over it. Sometimes that's a better technique if you have big gaps. But this is my technique. Just going to get it all taped up here with fiberglass mesh tape. This is a standard fiberglass, and you'll show at the end here there's other fiberglasses that I use. There's a green fiberglass, yellow fiberglass, different colors. The green one's like a mold resistant fiberglass that they sell. It just means it's sprayed with some chemicals that mold won't grow on. The standard white fiberglass, the go-to. The yellow fiberglass tape you'll see at the home improvement store. Some people like to use that. What the yellow is that if you coat it and you still see the yellow tape bleeding through your mud work, then you know you need another coat of mud. So that's what the difference between a white fiberglass and a yellow fiberglass is. So I just use a standard white fiberglass. There's also a brown fiberglass I'm going to show. They sell that stuff at some home improvement stores. That's a really heavy duty go-to fiberglass. If you're uncertain, you don't want your stuff to crack, you can spend the extra money. It's twice as much and you get this brown fiberglass. Difference in fiberglass is normal fiberglass just goes vertical and horizontal fiberglass strands. The good fiberglass tape goes vertical, horizontal, diagonal, every which direction for the fibers in the fiberglass. And you can see the difference here in the fiberglasses. The brown is the go-to expensive stuff. It's really strong, wider, thicker tape. It's expensive stuff, but the regular go-to stuff is just a regular white fiberglass. And you can see the difference between the two here, that one's thicker than the other, more detail in the fiberglass going every which way, diagonals. So that's why it's a stronger tape.